I'm going to tell you something that most dating advice won't. There's no guaranteed way to make a woman like you on a first date. Anyone who promises you that is selling something. But here's what I can tell you. There are ways to dramatically increase your odds. Ways to avoid the mistakes that kill attraction before it even has a chance to develop. And most importantly, ways to understand what's actually happening in modern dating so you can stop wasting time on approaches that don't work. Today, we're going deep on the psychology of first dates. What's changed, why the old advice doesn't work anymore, and what actually creates genuine connection in a dating landscape that's fundamentally different from anything previous generations dealt with. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. The rules your father learned don't apply anymore. A generation ago, dating was simpler. Not necessarily easier, but simpler. There were clearer expectations, defined roles, a shared understanding of how courtship worked. A man who had a job, treated a woman well, and showed genuine interest had a reasonable shot at building something. Today, those same qualities are table stakes at best, and invisible at worst. Having a job doesn't make you special. It makes you baseline functional. Treating her well doesn't create attraction. It's expected. Showing genuine interest can actually work against you if it's perceived, music, as neediness or pressure. What changed? Everything. Dating apps created infinite options, which created infinite comparison. Social media created curated highlight reels that make real people seem disappointing by comparison. Cultural shifts reframe traditional masculine confidence as potential threat rather than attractive strength. The result is a dating environment where many people, men and women both, are more confused than ever about what they actually want and how to find it. Your father could take a woman to dinner, show genuine interest, be consistent, and that often worked. You can do all those things perfectly and get ghosted because she matched with someone more exciting while you were in the bathroom. The competition isn't just the other guys she knows. It's every guy with a good profile photo within 50 meters. Here's the first paradox you need to understand. The traits that biologically create attraction are often the same traits that culturally get criticized. Confidence, decisiveness, leadership, persistence. These qualities trigger attraction on a primal level. They signal competence, strength, the ability to protect and provide. Evolution spent millions of years wiring these preferences into human psychology. But modern culture often frames these same qualities differently. Confidence becomes arrogance. Decisiveness becomes controlling. Leadership becomes domination. Persistence becomes not respecting boundaries. So men face an impossible choice: display the traits that create attraction and risk being labeled problematic, or suppress those traits to be safe and wonder why there's no spark. The truth is more nuanced than music, either extreme. It's not that confidence is bad or that being soft is good. It's that you need to understand what you're actually doing and why. Confidence that comes from genuine self-assurance reads differently than confidence that's performed to impress. Leadership offered as a gift reads differently than leadership imposed as control. The men who succeed in modern dating aren't the ones who abandon masculinity. They're the ones who've learned to express it in ways that feel inviting rather than threatening, without losing the core strength that makes it attractive in the first place. There's a war happening inside almost everyone you'll date, and understanding it gives you a massive advantage. On one side, millions of years of evolutionary programming. Attraction triggers that were wired in long before language, culture, or dating apps existed. These drives are powerful, immediate, and largely unconscious. On the other side, social conditioning. The messages absorbed from media, peers, cultural narratives about what people should want in a partner. These influences are newer, more conscious, and often contradict the evolutionary programming. The result? People often don't know what they actually want. They'll tell you they want a sensitive, emotionally available partner who respects their boundaries and communicates openly. And consciously, they probably do want that. But when they meet someone who fits that description perfectly, there's often no spark. Meanwhile, someone who triggers their evolutionary programming through presence, confidence, a hint of unpredictability, creates immediate interest, even if they don't check the conscious boxes. This isn't a criticism of anyone, it's just reality. Human desire is complicated, contradictory, and rarely fully understood, even by the person experiencing it. For you on a first date, this means don't take stated preferences at face value. Pay attention to what creates actual engagement, not just what someone says they're looking for. And understand that the person across from you might be genuinely confused about their own attraction patterns. She might tell you she wants a man who shares his feelings openly, but watch what happens when you actually do. Does she lean in with interest, or does something subtle shift in her expression? She might say she values stability and reliability, but notice whether her energy increases more when you talk about your steady job or when you mention the spontaneous trip you took last year. This isn't about catching her in hypocrisy. It's about understanding that human desire is layered and often contradictory, and the conscious layer isn't always the one that drives decisions. Modern dating is plagued by something previous generations didn't deal with at this scale: widespread confusion about what people actually want. When your grandparents dated, options were limited. You dated people from your community, your church, your social circle. The pool was small, expectations were clear, and decision making was simpler by necessity. Today, dating apps present thousands of potential matches. Each one represents a different possible life, a different set of trade-offs, a different version of the future. This abundance creates paralysis. Why commit to anyone when there might be someone better? One more swipe away? Add to this the constant exposure to idealized relationships on social media, the conflicting advice from 1,000 different sources, and the economic pressures that delay traditional milestones, and you get a dating population that's fundamentally uncertain about what they're even looking for. This confusion affects how first dates play out. You might be sitting across from someone who's checking boxes rather than feeling connection. Someone who's comparing you to an imaginary ideal they assembled from Instagram, highlights, and romantic comedies. Someone who doesn't actually know what would make them happy in a relationship because they've never stopped to figure it out. You can't fix someone else's confusion, but you can recognize it for what it is. Avoid taking rejection personally when it stems from their uncertainty rather than your inadequacy, and focus on finding people who actually know what they want. Every man on a first date faces the same dilemma. How assertive should I be? Too assertive, and you risk coming across as pushy, aggressive, not respecting her autonomy. You might make her uncomfortable. You might get rejected for being too much. Not assertive enough, and you risk being forgettable. Nice but boring. Pleasant but no spark. She'll tell her friends you were sweet in that tone. That means she's never going to see you again. Here's the thing. Both outcomes are possible with the same level of assertiveness, depending on who you're with. What feels like confident leadership to one woman feels like pressure to another. What feels like respectful restraint to one woman feels like passivity to another. The solution isn't to find the perfect calibration that works for everyone. It doesn't exist. The solution is to be genuinely yourself. At your best, but genuinely yourself. And let the chips fall where they fall. If your natural level of assertiveness is too much for her, you weren't compatible anyway. If your natural presence is too subtle for her, same conclusion. You're not looking for someone who tolerates your personality. You're looking for someone whose preferences align with who you actually are. Stop trying to be the version of yourself that you think she wants. Start being the best version of yourself, full stop. Then pay attention to who responds to that reality. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Honesty is often punished in early dating. The man who accurately represents himself, his job, his lifestyle, his intentions often loses to the man who embellishes. The guy who admits he's still figuring things out loses to the guy who projects false certainty. The person who's upfront about their flaws loses to the person who hides them until after commitment is secured. This creates a perverse incentive structure. Men learn that honesty doesn't work, so they start crafting personas. They learn to present idolized versions of themselves because the authentic version kept getting rejected. And then everyone complains that dating is full of liars and people aren't who they presented themselves to be. But the system created those liars. When honesty is consistently punished and performance is consistently rewarded, people adapt. So what do you do with this information? Option 1, play the game. Learn to embellish. present the highlight reel. This might get you more first dates and more initial interest, but it builds relationships on unstable foundations. Option 2. Stay honest and accept lower initial success rates. This filters faster. You'll get rejected by people who are only interested in the embellished version, which means you'll find people interested in the real version more efficiently. There's no objectively right answer here, but there's a question worth asking. What kind of relationship are you trying to build, and what foundation does that require? Here's what I've observed. The men who embellish get more initial interest, but build on unstable foundations. The relationships start with a version of them that doesn't exist, and eventually reality shows up. The men who stay honest get less initial interest, but build on solid ground. When someone chooses them, they're choosing the real thing. The honest path is harder at first and easier later. The dishonest path is easier at first and harder later. Choose accordingly. If you listen to what people say they want and then try to be that, you'll often end up confused and unsuccessful. I want someone who's emotionally available. Then they date someone emotionally unavailable because the pursuit feels exciting. I want someone who communicates openly. Then they lose interest in someone who does because it feels too easy, too lacking in mystery. I want someone who respects my independence. Then they're drawn to someone who challenges that independence because it creates tension and engagement. This isn't hypocrisy. People genuinely believe they want these things. They're describing what sounds good to them consciously. But attraction operates largely below consciousness, following patterns that don't always match stated preferences. On a first date, watch what creates actual engagement rather than what she says she's looking for. Notice when her energy increases. Notice what makes her laugh. Lean in, lose track of time. That's the real information. The stated preferences are just theories about attraction. The actual responses are data. This doesn't mean ignore what people say. It means hold it lightly and verify against behavior. Trust patterns over proclamations. Given everything I've said about honesty being punished, this might seem contradictory, but hear me out. Radical honesty might be your best strategy, not because it maximizes first date music success. It doesn't. But because it maximizes the efficiency of finding genuine compatibility. When you show up as your actual self, your real job, your real interests, your real personality without the polish, you filter fast. The people who aren't interested in the real you leave early. The people who are interested in the real you stay. More importantly, there's a growing segment of the dating population that's exhausted by games. They've dated the performers, the embellishers, the guys who are great on the first date and disappointing by the third. They've become skilled at detecting inauthenticity, and they're hungry for someone who's just real. When you show up with radical honesty, here's who I am, here's what I'm looking for, here's what I can offer. You stand out to these people precisely because you're not playing the game everyone else is playing. Radical honesty isn't weakness. Done right, it's actually a form of confidence. It says, I know who I am, I'm not ashamed of it, and I'm not going to pretend to be something else to gain your approval. That's attractive in itself. Most mainstream dating advice sounds reasonable on paper and fails in practice. Here's why. Focus on emotional connection. Great in theory, but emotional connection requires vulnerability, which requires trust, which takes time to develop. On a first date, you're strangers. Trying to force emotional depth too fast feels awkward and contrived. Respect her boundaries. Obviously, yes. But this advice is often interpreted as passivity. Never make a move, never express interest. Wait for explicit permission at every stage. This creates dates that feel like careful negotiations rather than exciting possibilities. Be yourself. The most common advice and the least actionable. Which self? Your nervous self, your performing self, your best self, your authentic but not yet refined self. Be yourself assumes you know who that is and can access it on demand. Build healthy relationship patterns. Excellent advice for relationships. Not very helpful when you're sitting across from a stranger trying to figure out if there's mutual interest. The problem with most dating advice is that it's written by people who've forgotten what early dating actually feels like, or it's written for an idealized dating world that doesn't match reality. It focuses on what should work rather than what does work. Effective first dates require understanding human psychology as it actually operates, not as we wish it would. Here's something that will save you a lot of confusion. Many people on first dates aren't actually there to find a partner. They're there to browse. Dating apps have turned partner selection into something that feels like online shopping. Scroll through options, click on what looks interesting. Add to cart for later consideration. Keep browsing because there might be something better. Some people are going on dates not because they're ready to connect with someone, but because dating has become a form of entertainment. It's something to do. It provides validation. It generates stories to tell friends. The actual outcome, finding a partner, is almost secondary. When you're on a date with a browser rather than a genuine searcher, nothing you do will work. You could be perfect for them, and they still won't choose you because they're not actually in choosing mode. They're in browsing mode. This isn't something you can control or fix, but recognizing it helps you stop taking certain rejections personally. Sometimes, the failure isn't you, it's that you are never really being considered in the first place. The best you can do is try to identify browsers early and not invest disproportionate energy in people who were never serious to begin with. Signs of a browser: they're not fully present on the date, constantly checking their phone, giving surface-level answers, not asking you questions in return, already talking about how busy they are this week. A genuine searcher is engaged, curious, making time. A browser is going through the motions while keeping their options perpetually open. All right, enough diagnosis. Let's talk about what actually creates connection on a first date. First, presence. This sounds vague, but it's not. Presence means being fully engaged with what's happening rather than performing a script in your head. It means actually listening rather than waiting for your turn to talk. It means responding to her, not to the idealized version of the date you planned beforehand. People can feel when you're present versus when you're performing. Presence creates safety and intrigue simultaneously. She feels seen, which is rare. And she can't predict you, which maintains interest. Second, genuine curiosity, not interview questions, not checklist items. Actual interest in who this person is, how they think, what makes them tick. Curiosity is attractive because it's rare. Most people are too focused on making an impression to actually get curious about the person they're with. Third, willingness to lead, not dominate, lead. Suggesting the venue rather than deferring, making decisions rather than constantly asking what she prefers, having opinions rather than agreeable emptiness. Leadership signals confidence, and confidence remains attractive regardless of what culture says about it. Fourth, comfort with silence. Nervous people fill every gap with chatter. Confident people can let moments breathe. Being comfortable with brief silence signals that you don't need to perform constantly, that you're secure enough to just be. This is more relaxing for everyone. Fifth, appropriate tension. Some flirtation, some playful challenge, enough to signal romantic interest without being aggressive about it. The date should feel different from hanging out with a friend. There should be something charged in the air, even if it's subtle. Many guys make the mistake of being so concerned with making her comfortable that they forget to create romantic tension. They end up having a pleasant conversation that feels like a job interview or a friendship hangout. She leaves thinking you're nice, but feeling nothing. Tension comes from light teasing, from holding eye contact a beat longer than necessary, from not agreeing with everything she says, from having your own opinions and expressing them confidently. It comes from treating the interaction as a dance between two people with romantic potential, not a polite exchange of information. Here's a mindset shift that changes everything. Stop trying to be chosen and start choosing. Most men go into first dates with a performance mentality. They're auditioning, trying to impress, hoping to be selected.